All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the effects of inflation and deflation. This is one of the most important concepts regarding inflation and deflation is who it helps and who it hurts. So inflation is going to benefit borrowers, debtors, including the government, and it penalizes creditors. And the reason is the debtor gets to go ahead and pay back the creditor in less valuable dollars. Because remember that basically inflation is going to decrease the purchasing power of the dollar. So the creditor is going to be paid back in less valuable dollars, and the debtor gets to go ahead and pay back the creditor in less valuable dollars. So let me give you an example. Let's say Mr. Vanderpool borrows $1,000 from a bank. So Mr. Vanderpool is now a debtor. And so let's say inflation hits. So prices start going up, and most likely Mr. Vanderpool's wages start going up in response to that inflation. So let's say I go from making $70,000 a year to $140,000. So now I've borrowed that $1,000, and it would be it's much easier for me to go ahead and pay back that bank that $1,000 making $140,000 a year versus $70,000 a year. The only problem is the creditor, the bank, is getting paid back in less valuable dollars. That dollar does not buy as much as it did before the inflation. So this inflation leads to uncertainty for businesses, which consequently are unwilling to invest for the future. Inflation will also hurt people on a fixed income, retirees who are getting paid a certain amount, but prices of, say, from Social Security, for example, but prices are going up. Now, Social Security in and of itself is actually indexed for inflation. So if something's indexed for inflation, they're get paid more, then they might not necessarily get hurt from inflation. But if you have a retiree that's on a fixed income and their income cannot adjust for inflation, then their income is the same, the price of everything is going up, and they're going to do worse off. So basically, inflation is going to hurt people who can't raise their wages, or suppliers who can't raise their prices in response to the inflation. Inflation's going to make it so you don't want to hold on to cash, because cash money is going to be losing its value with inflation as well. Also, remember, it's going to go ahead and help people that borrow at a fixed interest rate. Okay, so there's two types of when you borrow things. You can borrow at a fixed interest rate or a variable interest rate. A fixed interest rate is fixed over the life of the loan. The variable rate can change. If somebody borrows at a fixed interest rate, okay, you're going to be helped considerably from this inflation, because you can go ahead and pay back that loan in less valuable dollars. It's easier to pay back the loan as well. And the lender, the creditor, can't raise interest rates on you in response to the inflation because it's a fixed rate. If you have a variable rate in the lending, okay, the creditor can go ahead and raise interest rates in response to inflation. Okay, so the debtors definitely want fixed interest rates during this inflationary period. Variable interest rates aren't as good because the creditor can raise their interest rates in response to the inflation. All right, let's go to deflation. Deflation, or the lowering of the overall price level, will penalize borrowers because the borrowers are going to have to pay back, because remember, deflation is going to basically increase the purchasing power of the dollar. So borrowers are going to have to pay back their debts in dollars that are more valuable. And this is actually going to help creditors or lenders because they are getting paid back in those more valuable dollars. Deflation is going to reduce the pressure for wage gains due to high unemployment in deflationary periods. So during deflation, generally you want to hold on to cash. Deflation is going to delay spending because if prices are falling, people aren't going to buy now, they're going to buy later. So that's the biggest problem with deflation is deflation is going to actually cause a deflationary cycle where if prices are falling, people don't buy. And if people don't buy, prices fall, which means less people buy, which causes prices to fall. And so you can have this deflationary spiral that can really end up hurting an economy within deflation. Incidentally, with inflation, that can also create kind of a spiral because if people expect prices to go up in the future, they're going to go ahead and buy now, which will cause prices to go up, which means more people are going to want to buy now. And so inflation can kind of push its way up, and deflation can kind of push prices down. Kind of creates self-sustaining cycles. So remember, with deflation, generally you do want to hold cash money because you can buy more with that dollar. Generally during deflationary periods, unemployment rates are going to go up. You're not going to have to pay people as much in wages because the prices of the things they are buying are going down. And then also you have what's called disinflation. We're going to talk about that a little bit in this class. And that is when you have a lowering of the inflation rate. A low level of inflation that's lowering, called disinflation. This can be a good thing for an economy. All right, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about correcting economic variables for the effects of inflation. So price indexes are used to correct for the effects of inflation when comparing dollar figures from different times. So let me give you an example. So we're going to do the following to convert or to inflate Babe Ruth's wages in 1931 to dollars in 2001. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to know the salary in 2001 is equal to the salary in 1931 when Babe Ruth was playing, times the price level in 2001 over the price level in 1931. So if I give you the price level in 2001 of 177, the price level in 1931 of 15.2, so those I just give to you, you'll go ahead and plug those numbers in there. You have your salary in 1931, which is 80,000 times 177 over 15.2, and you have 931,579. So that price index basically took your salary in 1931 and put it in 2001 dollars. Now, we already talked about this a little bit, but we talked about Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind back in 1939 made a couple $100 million, but that's a nominal number. When you make that into a real number and adjust it for inflation, it made over $1 billion. Still one of the top grossing films of all time in terms of real earnings. So when some dollar amount is automatically corrected for inflation by law or by contract, the amount is said to be indexed for inflation. So we talked about how Social Security payments to the elderly. That is indexed for inflation. Salaries, retirement fund, pension funds might have COLAs, cost of living adjustments, that make it so every year you're paid a little bit more, and that's usually going to be based on inflation as well. So indexation is very important for those specific things. You got to get that inflation number right so you can index correctly. Now, I want to talk about real versus nominal interest rates. So interest represents a payment in the future for a transfer of money in the past. So interest is the cost of borrowing for the borrower, but it is the gain of lending for the creditor. So now we're going to compare real and nominal interest rates. So nominal interest rate, which is represented by I percentage, is the interest rate that is usually reported and is not corrected for the inflation rate, which we represented with the pi percentage. It's the interest rate that the bank pays, and it's the headline rate. It is not corrected for price changes, not corrected for inflation and deflation. Real interest rate is a nominal interest rate that is corrected for the effects of inflation or deflation. Real interest rates are generally what economists care about and what we're going to be working with in this class. We want to correct for those price changes so we can compare numbers over time. All right, so let's look at a scenario here. So let's say we borrowed $1,000 for a year. Nominal interest rate was 15%. During the year, inflation was 10%. So what we're going to use is we're going to use an equation to figure out what is our real interest rate. So the real interest rate is equal to the nominal interest rate minus inflation. Real interest rate is equal to the nominal interest rate minus inflation. Or R percentage is equal to I percentage minus pi percentage. So we know our nominal rate was 15%. We know inflation was 10%. So the real interest rate, the real amount that this bank that did the lending earned was 5%, because the inflation ate into that nominal return of 15%. So let's do some other scenarios here. Let's say you borrowed $1,000, the nominal rate was 7%, inflation rate was 3%. Okay, in that case, you would have a real interest rate of 4%. 7 minus 3, 4%. Let's say under that scenario, the nominal interest rate was 4%. The inflation rate was 8%. You'd actually have a negative 4% with your real interest rate, because inflation is greater than your nominal interest rate. You're actually achieving a negative return there. Let's say you have a nominal rate of 10% and your real rate was 3%. What is your inflation rate going to be? It's going to be 7%. So once you know two of those numbers in that equation, you can easily calculate the other. All right, let's do the assessment here. So for number one, we're going to describe the steps to calculating the CPI. That was from the first video. And then we're going to describe how one calculates a real interest rate. Go ahead and talk to me about that equation. R percentage equal to I percentage minus pi percentage. Give me an example. And we'll go from there. All right, so for the summary in a paragraph, describe what you learned today. I will check these notes tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye-bye.